heard about MR Rangaswami. MR is an entrepreneur, investor, corporate eco-strategy expert, community builder, and a philanthropist. No words can do justice to his introduction, but he's recognized as a software business expert. He has witnessed the rapid expansion of Silicon Valley software industry during his tenure as the executive at both large and small software companies. In 1997, he co-founded Sandhill Group, one of the earliest angel investment firms, and was profiled on the front page of Wall Street Journal. He was named to the Forbes Midas list of investors and also recognized by CRN as one of the top 25 technology executives. He also hosts the enterprise retreat for the top 100 leaders in technology. MR founded the CorpEcoForum, Indiaspora. It's a nonprofit which engages in community issues such as an initiative to get the United States Postal Services to issue a stamp for Diwali, our festival, in 2016. MR is on the board of a number of organizations such as Kailash Satyarthi Children's Foundation, the Nudge Foundation, and the Wish Foundation. He is the recipient of the Association to Advance Collegiate Schools of Business Influential Leaders Award in 2015, and the US-China Education Trust inaugural Asians in America Award in 2016. In 2020, he was a recipient of the Global Service Award from the Canada-India Business Council. Without much further ado, I would like MR to come and give his pearls of wisdom on how the rise of Indians in the Valley and US tech CEOs. MR, welcome.
Thank you so much, Piyush, and thank you for those kind words. I really appreciate being here with you this morning. And again, I've been given this task of 15 minutes to kind of chronicle the rise of Indian Americans. It's really a verbal excerpt from a recent book that I want to just spotlight, The Rise of Indian Americans. And I had the privilege of writing a chapter there, but we'll cover that whirlwind tour in 15 minutes for you, and hopefully there might be some questions if the time permits. Again, I had a comfortable job in Houston, Texas. And I'm, full disclosure, I'm not an engineer. So I'm happy to be addressing all of you, but I'm not an engineer. I'm an accountant, a wannabe lawyer, and an MBA. And I was living in Houston, comfortable job, when a consultant who I knew told me, go west, young man. And this was years ago, as you can imagine. And he said, go to Silicon Valley. So in 1982, I was lucky enough, and I was an accidental person who came to Silicon Valley in 1982. Just imagine this, you're dropped into Silicon Valley, there's no internet, there's no Facebook, there's nothing here in Silicon Valley. You come here, and at that time, there were only a few thousand Indians living in Silicon Valley. And they were mostly engineers. They were mostly from IIT, and they were working in companies in the semiconductor industry. They were chip designers, chip manufacturing kind of experts, and so forth. They worked at companies, many of them are not here today, like National Semiconductor, Fairchild Semiconductor, and now more recently, Intel, and so forth. So that was the livelihoods that most people had in Silicon Valley 4 decades ago. So let's just look at our journey of this community. And I was, really privileged enough to be an observer and participant, and had a ringside seat over the 4 decades, right? So initially, just imagine, few thousand engineers working on chip design, mainly mainframe computers at that time, right? There were only mainframe computers. Slowly, chips started improving, and chips were designed for something called mini computers. I don't need to tell all of you engineers what they were. And this kind of next seminal moment of developing mini computers meant there needed to be more software design. And therefore, a lot of Indians moved from hardware design to software design, and kind of proliferated the industry, if you will, more than chip companies. Now they went to all the computer companies, companies like Hewlett Packard and many others that were in the Valley at that time, right? So we evolved from hardware jocks, as you would call it, to hardware and software jocks, and spread through more companies in Silicon Valley at that time. So then what happens? Then people move up the management chain. So you come in as an engineer, you become a supervisor, you move up to be a manager, a director, and a vice president. So that was the evolution of the Indian engineers at that time. Slowly, they proved themselves. They were successful, moved up the value chain, and eventually they became entrepreneurs. So you noticed in the late 80s, there were many Indian entrepreneurs who had founded companies. And in fact, some of them took the companies public. These are people like the late Narayan Gupta with integrated systems, people like Kanwal Rekhi with Excelan, people also like Vinod Khosla with Sun Microsystems. And so you could see slowly over that decade, Indian Americans, moving from engineers all the way up to entrepreneurs, taking their company public, selling their companies in acquisitions, and so on and so forth, right? So that was the first decade. Now let's move on to the second decade, the 1990s. What happens in the 1990s? If you all recall, at that time, there was this whole crisis around Y2K, the year 2000, the dreaded year 2000. When January 1st, 2000, planes would crash, trains would stop, ATMs would stop functioning, and the whole world would just come to a complete standstill. What needed to happen at that time? Software. All the software that was written in the 60s, 70s, and 80s needed to be rewritten, needed to be corrected, needed to be fixed. And people had to know these old languages, COBOL and Fortran and such. Guess who knew those languages? Because fortunately or unfortunately, India at that time was way behind. We didn't import new computers in India. So we were teaching all the students in India on the old computers and old languages, like I said, COBOL and Fortran. So fortunately, Silicon Valley and the US had access to tens of thousands of Indian engineers who knew these languages. And guess what? At that time in the early 90s, there was no internet. It wasn't really functioning to the point you could work remotely like we can today. So what did companies have to do? They had to import thousands of Indian engineers to actually come and live in the United States. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the advent of the H-1B visa. So all these people were given H-1B visas to immigrate to the United States on a 3 or 6 year visa and come and fix these problems on computer systems that work in the US. Okay, so that was the second migration, a big migration of Indian Americans coming to the Valley, right? And this happens throughout the 1990s. And as the year 2000 comes closer and closer, the tension mounts, and people are really afraid that everything is going to come to an end. The world is going to come to an end. Fortunately, nothing happens. January 1, 2000 comes along and everything works, right? But then at that time, all these people had migrated to the US. They were moving from H-1B visas to green cards, and they were moving from green cards to becoming US citizens, and they were moving up the immigration value chain, right? Then what happens? The next decade of the 2000s, some other very important things and moments occur. On one side, Indian Americans move from being entrepreneurs and CEOs to now becoming venture capitalists. You hear of people like Deep Nishar at SoftBank. You hear of Ashu Garg at Foundation Capital, Naveen Chadha at Mayfield, and many, many, many more become venture capitalists who are now funding. They've been successful entrepreneurs. They've now funding new entrepreneurs. And of course, the affinity demands that many of the people they fund are Indian Americans, right? So that's one track that you see Indian American engineers take, is go from engineer to entrepreneur to venture capitalist. Another track of Indian Americans have started in large companies like Google and Microsoft and Adobe as engineers, right? And they move up that value chain of becoming manager, VP, and so forth. And then they all get anointed as CEOs of large tech companies. Satya Nadella at Microsoft, Sundar Pichai at Google, Shantanu Narayan at Adobe, and so on and so forth. And that trend still continues to this day, right? More recently, you have Twitter having a new Indian CEO. You have companies even more recently like Elastic. so many more companies have Indian CEOs. So that is the second really track that Indian American engineers go through, becoming CEOs of large public software and tech companies, also becoming very successful venture capitalists, right? So this then culminates in the next decade, which is the 2010 to 2020. Again, what happens now is that Indian Americans start founding tech startups by the hundreds and thousands, right? The latest statistic is 1 out of every 3 companies founded in Silicon Valley has an Indian co-founder, right? So it's almost, a must that when there's a new tech startup, there's an Indian co-founder in the company, right? And now what has happened is there are now hundreds of companies that are highly successful with Indian CEOs in the private startup world. And many of them are unicorns. You look around Silicon Valley, you'll see so many companies run by Indians who are, unicorn companies. So now you see that trajectory grow even further, where now they're now taking these companies public, right? You've seen a company like Freshworks go public recently at a 10 billion plus market cap, and so on and so forth. So see the journey, how it's happened. Engineers move up the value chain of management, become CEOs, become venture capitalists, become CEOs of large trillion-dollar tech companies, become co-founders of hundreds of companies, become unicorn CEOs. So you kind of see the rise over 4 decades of what Indian Americans have done. And like I said, when I came in 1982, cities like Santa Clara and Campbell, these are cities that a lot of you engineers who are in Valley know, had orange groves and orchards. And now, it's all buildings, right? Things have changed. You see the number of Indian restaurants, you see Indian movie theaters, cultural events all over the Bay Area. And this is what I've chronicled in my chapter in The Rise of Indian Americans. Just wanted to walk you through this amazing journey of what we have come through. But this is not without our challenges. So I want to spotlight a couple of challenges that we face. One is, as you can imagine, the description I've given you so far have really omitted women, right? We're woefully lacking in women as role models, successful women being moved up in the value chain. And there are some who are the early pioneers who have led the charge. People like Padma Warrior, who was the CTO at Cisco, now runs a very successful startup called Fable. Jayashree Ulal, who is now an anointed billionaire running Arista Networks. And Yamini Rangan, more recently was appointed the CEO of HubSpot, like a 40 billion market cap company. So they're coming up, and we need to really encourage, we need to really have that diversity even in our own community. The tech community lacks women in leadership, so does the Indian American community. So we need to really take charge and give them the opportunity, give them the space to move up and be successful as well. And the other thing we shouldn't forget is the next generation. Now, there are so many of our children who are engineers as well. They've gone to engineering school, they've started tech startups, again, but they are not like the first generation of Indian Americans who came from India. These are kids born and raised in the US. They have their own issues, own challenges, and they need their own space to grow up both as Indians and Americans. So we do have some of these challenges in our community. And the third challenge we have is on the poverty side. Who would imagine that there are over 5,000 Indian Americans, yes, 5,000 Indian Americans living below the poverty line in Santa Clara County, which is probably the richest county in the United States. So let's not forget the invisible Indian Americans who are working at convenience stores or Uber drivers who really need to be helped in the process as well. So that's why the next step is for Indian Americans to give back. And in that regard, there are several role models already here. People like Ramesh Wadhwani, who signed the Gates Giving Pledge to give away his billions of dollars he's made to nonprofits and to charity. So I think we can learn from people like him and even give back in our own small way to the community at large. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is a whirlwind tour of 15 minutes that I've been given to really chronicle how engineers rose up the ranks to become the most successful people here in Silicon Valley. I hope this is an inspiration to all of you who are listening, that you can, again, accomplish the same Indian American dream. If you work hard and you get some lucky breaks, you can as well join this growing list of successful Indian Americans. So Piyush, thank you for inviting me here to the ASEI convention. And if there are any questions or if you have any time, happy to
Yes,
stay
absolutely.
and answer some questions.
Absolutely. There are questions coming up. And actually, I see one from Paul Sikand. He is a long-time Boeing fellow, technical person and involved with the ASI for a long time. He's asking if, can we talk about Siddharth Vidyarthi Foundation and your role?
Yeah, Kailash Satyarthi, as you know, Piyush, is a Nobel laureate. He won the Nobel Peace Prize.
I was not sure. Kailash Satyarthi is, I know about, but there was another question that, so maybe that's mixed up. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so he started this foundation. Again, he's against child trafficking, sex trafficking of children and so forth. He saved almost 100,000 children in India from the clutches of really bad people who exploit children. So I'm so privileged and honored to be on his board to really help the cause and really make sure that child labor and child trafficking is something that is banished from this world.
Great, thank you. And MR, while the other questions trickle up, I know there are a lot of folks coming on, speakers from the other panel as well showing up. So welcome all of them. One thing I did want to know is, as you come across new entrepreneurs in the Valley, as you see today, more and more Indian companies or companies started out of India are getting venture funding, a lot more than what it used to be 10 years ago or even 20 years ago, right? What do you see in an Indian engineer to bet on him or her and say, okay, child, I blessed you. Here's my millions of dollars. Please enlighten us.
Yeah, I think this is a new trend. I'm glad you brought it up. And one of the things we do at Indiaspora, I encourage you to go to our website. It's a nonprofit, indiaspora.org, subscribe to our newsletter. But one of the things we're doing is helping, these young Indians from India kind of transition to their life in Silicon Valley as well. Because when they come here, they have similar characteristics, Piyush, as young startup entrepreneurs here. Bright, driven. Some of them obviously drop out from the IITs, much like kids are dropping out from Stanford or Santa Clara or Berkeley here as well. So they have very similar characteristics. They're very driven. They have the aspiration to build successful companies, but they needed to be kind of mentored, and that's some of the things that Indiaspora is doing here. Is to kind of bring them here, kind of give them a soft landing, tell them where to live, tell them how to hire people, tell them, how to grow and so on and so forth. And there've been many successful companies transition. Like I said, Freshworks, Girish at Freshworks came from India, moved here to the US and has taken his company public. Many others are here, like Unifor, Umesh at Unifor, Abhinav at Innovator. There are many unicorn companies now here in the Valley, people who have transitioned from India to the US, who look for mentors and who look for help. So one of Indiaspora's roles is to actually help many of these people here too, to kind of move to the US and be successful. Yes.
Great, thank you. There's one more question that has popped up. How's the support like for companies which would like base in the Valley and scale in the States?
Sorry, once again, I didn't.
He's asking, how's the support like for companies which would like base in the Silicon Valley and then scale in the other states?
Yeah. So one of the things that's happening, obviously, as we have noticed, is the media has talked about people moving out of Silicon Valley and moving to other places. Or, I talk to at least 2 entrepreneurs a week. So please look me up on LinkedIn and connect with me. I talk to 2 entrepreneurs a week. I've done this for 25 years. I'm an angel investor as well, invested in over 150 startups. So when I talk to them, I give them feedback. I connect them with people that I know in my network. So this happens in our community quite a bit. And so, people are starting, obviously, companies in other places than Silicon Valley, and it's good to see this spread nationwide. And we're happy to help. And hit me up on LinkedIn, and happy to take a call and be helpful. But there are many more people like me in this network who are working with and mentoring and helping these startups in other states. Yeah.
Great, great. Is there any other question? Please type in the chat box. So not in the chat box, but in the Q&A box, and I'll bring it up. Meanwhile, MR, there is something that I want to tell the audience. Many of the audience are long-term members of ASEI. ASEI was started in Michigan, as you know, in '83, and then many of them are aerospace or automotive engineers. They never had the Silicon Valley presence, and until we came in and we started the chapter. And I'm blessed to have a great board of directors here. It was, and again, this is for the audience here, last year, middle of July, when in middle of July in 2020, when Hari Bindal, the founder of ASEI, called me and said, "Have you met MR Rangaswami?" I said, "Are you talking about the guy who gave us the Diwali stamp? Because that's when I had met you." So he said, "Yes, why don't we get a three-way meeting on?" And I reached out to you. We tried to schedule something. Unfortunately, by the time we got our meeting done, scheduled, Hari Bindal passed away. But you and I had a great conversation, and thank you for that. And it's a result of that conversation that we have stayed in touch, and you are here. So I want to thank you for being here and being our friend and being a mentor to so many Indian techies, not only in the Valley, but in the Indian diaspora. And I see your team expanding in Washington, D.C., and you do events all around. So great to be partnering with you, MR. And it's a pleasure to host you. We'll look forward to you staying around as we progress with the program.